So Spider-Man No Way Home has been out in theaters for well over a month now, and as you all know by now, Andrew Garfield appears in that movie, and it's left a lot of fans clamoring online for an Amazing Spider-Man 3. So we're going to ask the question today, should Sony make The Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew Garfield? We're going to weigh the pros and the cons. My name is Tom, I have the tingle thing, but just not for bread, and this is Tom's Take. So this is the second video I've done in my pros and cons series. The first one I did was, should Warner Brothers make the Ayer cut of Suicide Squad? I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. So of course, Andrew Garfield appears with Tobey Maguire and Tom Holland in Spider-Man No Way Home. And if you didn't know, it's my favorite movie of 2021. But it's left, this Twitter rabid fan base, hashtagging make TASM 3, make TASM 3. But then there's also the make Spider-Man 4 with Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire. But we're going to focus on Andrew Garfield and The Amazing Spider-Man 3 because I think that's the more prominent campaign going on right now. And I think, Tobey Maguire, as far as I'm concerned, he got a complete trilogy. Andrew Garfield didn't really get to finish that story of his Spider-Man. He sort of, came back in No Way Home and got a bit of a completion to that arc, but there is clearly a lot more story to tell there, especially between the time gap between Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man No Way Home. So I've got 4 pros and 4 cons, and I'm going to go through those and explain my reasoning, and then I'm going to leave it up to you guys as to what you think. Take the pros, take the cons, give me some of your own pros and cons, and let me know whether you think Sony should and will make The Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew Garfield. Or, alternatively, will they put him in their Venomverse and have him be the Spider-Man in that universe while Tom Holland is swinging around in the MCU? Okay, so we're going to start with the pros. Here we go. Okay, so the first pro to having Andrew Garfield either come back for Amazing Spider-Man 3 or put him in the Venomverse and say those universes are the same is that Sony would get to have their cake and eat it too. If I'm understanding the deal between Sony and Marvel right, Tom Holland gets to be in the MCU, Sony is the distributor of those movies, Marvel gets a percentage of those films, but Sony makes the majority of the money from those movies and from the Tom Holland Spider-Man MCU films. And so they get to have Spider-Man in the MCU, bolstering the IP for Spider-Man and bolstering its value, if you will, and its popularity because it's hugely successful and the MCU is the biggest, most dominant franchise in the world right now. And having Spider-Man in the MCU is a great thing for Sony and Spider-Man, and it's a great thing for the MCU. So they get to keep Tom Holland in that universe, and then they get to have their own Andrew Garfield Spider-Man swinging around in their universe. And they're making money off that. So it's like a double whammy. It's just a win-win in that scenario, and it's just Sony's just going to have dump trucks of money backing up to the studio. And money makes the world go round. So, if they're able to do that, that'd be great. They'd have the best of both worlds. The second pro, and the one that makes me the most excited, is that it would give more potential to future Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield crossovers. I mean, you could throw Tobey Maguire in there as well at some point if you wanted to, but, to have Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland meet up again at some point in the future as 2 Spider-Men teaming up, that would be really fun to see. And, Sony having a say in Tom Holland in the MCU and also having full control over Andrew Garfield. Because those two and, Tobey Maguire, all 3 of them, their chemistry in No Way Home was so good. And Tom Holland's Peter Parker learned a lot from those 2 Spider-Men. I kept saying in my videos for No Way Home that the Tom Holland Peter Parker learnt lessons that only 2 older Spider-Men could teach him. And so to bring, the 2 brothers back together again could be a great thing. And of course, Sony and Marvel know that has so much money-making potential. And I think clearly we're seeing that Sony and the MCU are gonna have some crossover between the 2 universes. We really don't know what they're gonna do right now. Right now it's a bit ambiguous as to whether the Sonyverse is the MCU, what is and what isn't, how separated are they, but, they can always cross them over. As long as Doctor Strange is running around the MCU, anything is possible. Okay, here's the third pro. The third pro is this, and Sony really has 2 options. So let's say, for example, and a lot of this video I'm building ifs upon ifs, but that's the point of, speculation and pros and cons. So the thing is that Sony would have the freedom to say, well, do we bring back Andrew Garfield and make The Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Mark Webb directing it and keep it as its own universe, separate from our current Venomverse? Or do we merge the two and say that the Venom universe is the Amazing Spider-Man universe and put Andrew Garfield in with Venom? Because then they get, again, it's a best of both worlds scenario. People have been wanting to see Spider-Man fight Tom Hardy's Venom, and you'd get to see that, but with Andrew Garfield. So their options are open. They can like merge it with the Venomverse, or they can continue their own Amazing Spider-Man universe. I think if they were going to bring Andrew Garfield over, they'd put him in the Venomverse. I just think that makes more sense. Because otherwise then you've got like 3 separate Spider-Man franchises running around, or Spider-Man adjacent franchises running around. And I think you want to minimize that as much as possible. And so, look, the thought of having Andrew Garfield Spider-Man fight Venom, like that to me, or at least meet up with Tom Hardy's Venom. I mean, he says it in No Way Home, he wants to fight an alien, so I'd love to see him fight an alien. I kind of feel like T'Challa in Infinity War, get this man an alien to fight. And the fourth and final pro I have for Andrew Garfield coming back to do Amazing Spider-Man 3 or to be in the Venomverse is that the popularity of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man has just skyrocketed after No Way Home. Listen, look, there are people that have always loved those movies and always loved Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, and that's, fair enough. I am not a big fan of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, although I do really like Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. His Spider-Man is great and he's great at it. But, even the people that have always loved those movies can't deny that No Way Home, it almost was kind of like a redemption for that character and that franchise. And it just has, the stock for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man has risen tenfold. And the beautiful thing about it is that now that Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man has been in the MCU, and has been in No Way Home and is this big popular movie that everyone's seen now, is that you're not going to run the risk of complete confusion if Sony brings in Andrew Garfield and Marvel's still got Tom Holland. Like, people will be like, yeah, I get it, because those two in the MCU, they've met, they've hung out, they've done all this stuff, and then Andrew Garfield goes back and fights Venom. Like, I don't think you'll have this mass, sort of confusion among the audience about which universe is this and how does this work, and wait, this isn't the same Spider-Man as that Spider-Man. You're not going to have that because all 3 of them were in the same movie together. And Andrew Garfield said he'd be open to coming back. And listen, I'm not going to lie. Like, after No Way Home, if you don't think that Andrew Garfield coming back for The Amazing Spider-Man 3 or putting him in, say, Venom 3 would make $1 billion, you're insane. It would make $1 billion. It would, easily. Okay, now we get into the cons. Now, I'm not going to lie. I had a lot of trouble coming up with 4 cons. I had 2 big cons, like major ones, and then I have 2 that are sort of cons, but I'm not willing to really die on the hill of these. So the first con I have is that you don't really have Emma Stone anymore, because, she died in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I think that'd be a con for The Amazing Spider-Man 3, only because her and Andrew Garfield had such great chemistry. It was like one of the strongest points of those movies, and it is one of the greatest on-screen romances in comic book movie history. And I think when you remove Emma Stone from that equation, what do you do? How do you fix that? What do you use to fill that hole? Now, listen, I trust Sony, I trust Marvel, and I'm sure they would come up with something and make it work. But Emma Stone not being there leaves a big shoes to fill. Like, do they bring in a Mary Jane? What do they do with that? I don't know, but it is a con, not having Emma Stone, not having that chemistry between them, that beautiful relationship between Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker and Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy. It does leave a bit of a void to be filled. Okay, this is probably the biggest con, and that is this. Can Sony even do it? Legally, contractually? Look, none of us have read the full agreement between Marvel and Sony, although I would love to, because that shit fascinates me to no end. But I don't know that Marvel would want another live-action Spider-Man running around while they're also trying to do their own live-action Spider-Man. And I think that's part of the reason that Sony's doing this Venomverse and that you haven't seen a Spider-Man yet while Marvel and Sony are co-producing the MCU Tom Holland Spider-Man, because they don't want to take away from their Spider-Man, from Tom Holland in the MCU. That's where they want the focus to be. And I'm sure in those agreements, it's, hey, while we've got this arrangement, you can't make another live-action Spider-Man. Peter Parker, Miles Morales, whatever. That's why you had Into the Spider-Verse come out and it was animated. Although I do wonder if after No Way Home, that someone's mind on that probably got changed. Because as I pointed out, now that Andrew Garfield has been in the MCU with Tom Holland in that universe, there'd be an easier leap for the audience to make. And the blue light went out, but that's okay. We'll carry on. The third con I have is that there is the risk, and as much as we're all Spider-Man fans and we're all hardcore nerds, we are not the general public. We are not the mass audience, the general movie-going audience who go to see, 2 or 3 movies a year. There is the risk of oversaturation. People are already talking about, people have been talking about for 10 years about comic book movie fatigue, which I don't really believe in. I think people have bad movie fatigue. If they go to see several bad movies in a row, then, several bad comic book movies in a row will give you fatigue. But as long as they're good and they keep being successful and the MCU's done a fantastic job of that, then comic book fatigue isn't really going to happen. But, if you had 2 separate Spider-Man franchises running around in live action, there's the possibility of oversaturation. There's a possibility of Spider-Man fatigue. And people are like, you know what? It's too much Spider-Man going on right now. It's too much. I can't handle it. I can see that being a problem for some people. And I think it's a very real concern for the studios that, when you have something that is more special, limited thing, the Spider-Man movies, they're coming out once every couple of years. It's an event. It's a build-up. But if you had Sony doing Amazing Spider-Man 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, and then you had the MCU doing Tom Holland Spider-Man home movies, that's a Spider-Man movie, once every year in 2 different franchises. So I can see the risk of, say, oversaturation or the character, just people just not being interested and just saying, I can't, it's too many, it's too much. Okay, here's the fourth and final con. And this one's a little bit shaky. It's more of a question that I have. So let's say that, and we don't know that Marvel and Sony are continuing their deal with Tom Holland, to be in the MCU. We don't know, but let's assume that they are, okay? So let's say Tom Holland is the Spider-Man in the MCU still. I mean, that's where No Way Home left him. He's in the MCU, right? So then Sony goes and they say, right, we're going to bring Andrew Garfield in to our universe, to the Venomverse, to the Amazing Spider-Man 3, whatever. What happens when the deal ends with Marvel? Because then Sony is left with Tom Holland as Spider-Man. They're left with that franchise just hanging there waiting to make more billions and billions of dollars. But they've already got an Andrew Garfield in the Venomverse or the Amazing Spider-Man 3. So then they're left with 2 different Spider-Men, live action, and they've sort of got to pick one because you can't have, having 2 studios do 2 separate Spider-Man movies, that's one thing. Trying to have Sony handle a live-action Tom Holland Spider-Man franchise, which they want to continue. They've been very vocal about that. Amy Pascal, they want to keep working with Tom Holland. Tom Holland is Sony's golden boy, and there is no way that they are not continuing the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, whether it's in the MCU or not. But how do they handle that when they're both under the same umbrella? I don't know. That's a con, and that might be something, that might be a reason why they're going, hey, we could bring Andrew Garfield back in our universe while Tom Holland's over in the MCU, but when the deal ends, do they swap Andrew Garfield out for Tom Holland? Do they bring both of them into the same movie to get, I don't know what you do with that. Anyway, guys, I'm going to leave the question for you, okay? Should and will Sony do The Amazing Spider-Man 3 with Andrew Garfield, or should they bring him into the Venomverse, or should they not do it at all? I don't know that they will. I'd like them to, because after No Way Home, I want to see Andrew Garfield and what he was saying in No Way Home about how he got vengeful and rageful and bitter and he stopped pulling his punches. I want to see that Spider-Man. What happens to that broken man after he loses the love of his life that he clearly blames himself for? What happens to that guy? I'd love to see that. That is a goldmine for story potential. So should Sony do it? Will Sony do it? What do you guys think? Make sure you jump down in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that subscribe button, ring that notifications bell so that you never miss out on my take on all things movies. My name is Tom, and I will see you guys next time.